Thank you for being here tonight, particularly under the circumstances of today. I think I did hear from a bunch of people who felt that it was going to be just too challenging, but I think it turned out to be very much of a metaphor, very intense energy and followed by beautiful sunshine. So hopefully that's a good metaphor for what we're all working on. I'm Bill Squadron. I'm president of Our Energy Policy, and I want to welcome you tonight. We're very excited to be here. We, as an organization, are a nonpartisan educational organization that brings together people from all corners of the energy sector to engage in civil, substantive dialogue on the critical energy policy issues of the day. And we then work closely with government officials at the federal, state, and local levels to take advantage of the conversations, consensus, points of differentiation, innovative ideas that come out of those sessions in order to advance their work to achieve sound energy policies for the country. And we do this through live events, through webinars, through roundtables. We have on our website, which I would strongly encourage everyone to use, the most extensive energy resource library assembled anywhere that compiles reports, studies, papers, very well curated, and that's one of our key programs which is used extensively by people in academia, government, industry, and so on. And one of the real hallmarks of it, which as I look out tonight is really reflective of all of you, is that we really bring people together from throughout the energy sector. So our organization, being nonpartisan, really focuses on assembling groups that represent oil and gas, clean energy, utilities, government, academia, finance, law, nonprofits, advocacy groups, really from all parts of the sector to come together to discuss and address the challenging issues of today. So we're going to jump in. I do want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, our colleagues at the University of Houston. This is the first event we've done in Houston, and we are so pleased to be able to be here on the campus. Alan Rossiter, and unfortunately in absentia, he couldn't be here tonight, Ramanan Krishnamurti, who runs the Energy Center, unfortunately could not be in town tonight, but they worked very closely with us to put this evening together, so my thanks to them. My thanks to all of our partners. Our energy policy is supported by, as you can see from this board, really a range of organizations and institutions throughout the energy landscape, and we're very grateful to our partners, and particularly to Shell and to BP for supporting this event tonight. And I really want to recognize our board member from BP, Michael Cohen, who's here tonight. Thank you, Michael, for all the good work that you do on behalf of the organization and its mission. And the last thing I would recommend to people is that, if you do go to our site, it'll give you an example of the kind of work we do and the programs we have. And we always post an audio or video recording of our events. So we had one in Washington just a couple of weeks ago on energy jobs and the energy economy, featuring former Secretary Moniz and the president of the Alliance to Save Energy, Paula Glover. Fascinating conversation on the transition to a different kind of energy economy and energy jobs. So I'd highly recommend that. I'm now going to bring up for our tribute to John Hofmeister, which was really in some ways a big part of the momentum for us to come out of the East Coast and really be here for the first time. Yossi Hollander, who is the chairman, founder, visionary of Our Energy Policy, really the one who conceived of it more than 10 years ago, is with us tonight, was close friends with John, and will come up and lead that tribute. And I have to say, it's my great privilege to be a friend and a colleague of Yossi's. He is a software entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a brilliant engineer. In fact, he's going from here to accept an award at the United Nations. I could go on, but I know we all don't want to hear 2 pages of biography, so I'm going to just bring up Yossi for the tribute to John Hofmeister. Yossi.
Good evening. We're gathered today to celebrate the life of the late John Hofmeister. John had a special connection to our energy policy, and he participated in our seminars a few times. John's career took him from a truck driver, to the president of Shell US. He was a classical American success story. He always shared his talent and assets for the greater good. The list of his philanthropic activities is too long to cover today and covers many areas. For example, he served as the chairman of the National Urban League, and he funded Citizens for Affordable Energy. However, what most people don't know is that John was also a movie star. He participated in the documentary Pump, which was seen by many millions. His personality came across, and by all accounts, he carried the movie. I think it is the only time that he and Elon Musk appeared on the same screen. John loved to teach and devoted a lot of his time to educate students, the public, and everyone who would listen. John joined the board of Fuel Freedom Foundation, a think tank I co-founded, and we became friends. I could always rely on John to be available and share his wisdom and insight. I miss him. May his memory be blessed. Please take a look at a short movie about John.
But ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear to each other, let's be honest. Energy extends over decades. That's the critical miss. Energy plans and implementations extend over decades.
Supply and demand are the economic drivers which change prices. And that's what we should be working on, is an increase of supply to offset the increase in demand to yield better prices in the energy marketplace.
And the reason I go back so far is that the amount of change that will occur in the next 25 years is, to me, double or more the change that has occurred from the 60s until now.
Here's my premise. We are today energy adequate, despite ourselves, but we are not energy secure without some fundamental change in how we approach energy.
If we don't drill more in this country, I am quite concerned about civil disturbances in our urban areas because of the price of fuel.
But let the big rules make common sense. And common sense to me is national security through energy independence, affordable energy for all citizens. I have great passion for the end game of a 21st century energy system that's available, affordable, and sustainable, to the point of zero or no carbon by 2060.
I'd like to invite John's brother, Doug, to say a few words.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Yoshi, for that excellent video of John and all of the things that he believed. I'll keep my comments short, but I'm delighted to be here. And like each of you, and his video pointed out, John brought his personal experience and ingenuity to do what he did to make our lives richer and more fulfilled every day. Being 2 years apart, John and I were fiercely competitive. I will say that he was always better at Latin. But it was when he was made president of Shell Oil and I was named a partner in Accenture's Resources Group that he pulled me aside and said that our business discussions were over. There would be no shadow of conflict of interest. That was his ethics. John loved teaching. The 50-year vision and strategy for energy that he assigned to students was among his favorite. Everyone had to create a 50-year plan, as evidence from what he believed in the video. The results to him were inspiring and innovative. You continue it. Your gift is that you understand the past, you know the present, what's happening right now, how and why, but most important, you envision the future and you lead it. This is what John lived for. Your work improves our lives and saves lives. Every minute of every hour of every day, this is what energy, oil, and gas do. And this is yours and John's legacy. I don't know how we could ever thank you for doing what you do, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Doug and Yossi, and clearly his legacy is a model and inspiration for all the work that we do, certainly at Our Energy Policy, is a driving force for what we try to accomplish. I'm going to ask now our keynote speaker, Starlee Sykes, and Dr. Paul Pavlou to join us up here. We're very, very fortunate to have Starlee joining us as our speaker tonight, and to have Dr. Paul Pavlou as her moderator and interviewer. I'm going to turn it over to Paul, but I will say, in introducing him, not only is he the Dean of the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston, also the Cullen Distinguished Chair Professor of Information Sciences, but, and this is in all the various introductions I've ever done, something I think I've never had the privilege to say, but was selected by Thomson Reuters as one of the world's most influential scientific minds. And so if that's not intimidating, I don't know what is, but he is a remarkable individual, and we're delighted to have him join us tonight as well. So Paul, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to meet you and be part of this conversation. So I'd like to first introduce Starlee. Well, I was given a much longer bio, but I don't want to take the whole 45 minutes of our conversation. So I picked some of my favorite and some of less favorite parts of your bio. So we'll get to that. So Starlee is the Senior Vice President for the Gulf of Mexico and Canada for BP, one of the largest deep water businesses in the world. She has 25 years of experience in leadership in the energy sector, and she led the creation of the first global subsea solution business, and has been a strong proponent of standardized industry solutions and improving collaboration among industry partners. Starlee is a chairwoman of the Board of Directors of BP Exploration and Production, and is a member of the BP American Board of Directors. She's very active in the community, the Board of Directors and Executive Committee of the Greater Houston Partnership, Vice Chair of the 23rd World Petroleum Congress, Board of Trustees of the Spindletop Impact Partners, and namely she was named 2021 International Citizen of the Year by the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. Oil and gas investors are one of the top 25 most influential women in energy, and Women Inc. as the 2022 most influential women executives in corporate America. That's quite impressive, even more than the scientific mind thing. What actually makes it a little bit sad to say, her mechanical engineering degree is from Texas A&M University, but well, we're not very happy here at U of H. But my degree myself is from Rice Electrical Engineering, and she's actually a famous alumna on the Industry Advisory Board for Engineering College and the 2020 College of Engineering Texas A&M Outstanding Alumni Award recipient. Starlee lives in Houston on and off 25 years with her husband and 3 sons. She enjoys outdoor activities, cooking and travel. And before we start the formal part, favorite outdoor activity, favorite dish you cook, and favorite destination?
Okay, so favorite activity is probably skiing.
Okay.
So I like anything athletic or outdoors or hiking or anything like that, but probably skiing. Favorite thing I like to cook, so I have an 18-year-old boy, so I make things that are like dense and big, so chicken pot pie is his favorite. So I make a great chicken pot pie from scratch that he loves. And then as far as travel, I like to travel everywhere, but because I like to ski, I love Colorado.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so hopefully you can invite us with a chicken pot pie next time, if I do well in these questions. And on a serious note, I'll ask Starlee to say a few words on the podium. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for having me tonight. It's great to be here. I wasn't sure if we'd ever get up here with tornadoes and storms and now fire alarms. So it's a good thing that we're able to get started. But on a serious note, it's an honor to be here, particularly in light of the recognition to a fantastic giant in our industry, and great to hear and learn a bit about his life. So an honor to be here in the same event on the same evening. So thank you. It's a pleasure to spend an evening with so many thoughtful and impactful leaders. My thanks to the entire OEP staff and team for bringing us together, and especially to my colleague, Michael Cohen. As many of you know, in addition to serving on the board of OEP, Michael is our chief economist at BP for the US, which means tonight I will refer all of the harder questions to Michael. President Harry Truman famously quipped once that he wanted a one-handed economist. He was tired of hearing on one hand this, but on the other hand that. As an economist, Michael gets nervous anytime he hears that quote around BP. But in an extraordinary complex world, the insights of our economics team are always clear, and we are very grateful for them. You've heard it before, but it bears repeating. Our industry is facing an unprecedented change and challenge at this time, which make OEP's mission more important than ever before. The world is the most complex it has been in any of our lifetimes. In energy, the opportunities are great, but so are the risks. In my role as Senior Vice President for the Gulf of Mexico and Canada, I'm keenly aware of the spotlight on energy supply, particularly of its importance in the US. And while I don't claim to be an expert on economics in the industry, I believe that the conversation we'll have tonight is an important one that requires the coming together of various minds and industries that are represented in this room. Tonight, I'd like to focus on three areas. First, how the war in Ukraine has increased the focus on what we in BP call the energy trilemma. I was actually really interested to hear how it was very similar to the three things that Mr. Hofmeister said were important. In BP, we talk about providing secure, affordable, and lower carbon energy. Second, I'll share a little about the role of hydrocarbons in our global portfolio, again, of which the US is a very key part. Our resilient hydrocarbons business remains a key pillar in our transformation into an integrated energy company and part of our ambition to reach net zero by 2050 or sooner and help the world get there too. Finally, I'll share just some of the key deliverables from our Gulf of Mexico business from the last few years. We think these successes position us extraordinarily well to help the world meet the energy trilemma of secure, affordable, lower carbon energy. Let's look first to the war in Ukraine. First and foremost, the human dimensions of this brutal conflict far outweigh anything else that we will discuss tonight. Tonight, everyone in this room will have a warm bed to sleep in. They'll wake up tomorrow to running water, electricity, and heat. That is not guaranteed for anyone in Ukraine, and we can never forget it. In the medium term, unless Russian gas flows return to global markets, the world is desperately in need of new sources of gas supplies. But new LNG export facilities are huge investments, in excess of $10 billion and taking 5 years plus to build. So we're looking at a prolonged period of higher natural gas prices, with Europe and Asia particularly badly affected. One implication is that gas-intensive industries in both Europe and Asia may start to relocate to areas which have access to low-cost natural gas. The US is one obvious beneficiary of this trend. With regards to oil, despite minimal disruption to Russian oil flows, there will be two lasting impacts. First, roughly 500,000 barrels per day of distillate supplies to Europe need to be replaced. This will require an increase in refining margins and will create price pressure that fuels inflation. Second, crude oil supplies from Russia have not yet fallen, but this is partly because prices remain largely below the price cap over the last month. So what does this all mean over the long term? a significant increase in attention on the energy industry and on energy security. That said, energy security can mean different things to different countries. For example, for the European Union, energy security means having diversified energy supplies from politically stable producers. Speaking candidly, the EU has failed on both of these counts. By contrast, for China and India, energy security increasingly means energy self-sufficiency. Whatever the definition, the increased focus on energy security carries several implications. Most importantly, an increase in demand for energy that's produced and consumed locally. We think this will help rapid adoption of non-fossil fuels and energies such as wind, solar, bioenergy, hydro, and nuclear, all of which are predominantly produced and consumed locally. But in many Asian economies, such as China, India, and Indonesia, it will also support the continued growth of coal, which is also available locally. Here in the US, we see the demand for local energy supporting domestic development of oil and gas resources while also focusing on demand-side measures to speed the decarbonization process. Now, on balance, if all of the growth in oil and gas consumption over the next 20 to 30 years were set to come from import demand from fast-growing Asian economies, that means that a focus on locally produced energy might speed the decline in demand for oil and natural gas. So what's the role for hydrocarbons in BP's strategy? Our analysis indicates that the world's energy sources will become diversified as time goes on. And although we see electrification and renewables penetration increasing across all scenarios, oil and gas remain critical. That is why we have shifted our focus from an international oil company to an integrated energy company. That is in service of our ambition to reach net zero by 2050 or sooner and help the world get there. Our strategy to do that focuses on 3 pillars: resilient hydrocarbons, convenience and mobility, and low carbon energy. We believe this will enable us to help meet the global energy trilemma that's been given so much focus since February of last year. Speaking to our first pillar, resilient hydrocarbons, resilient hydrocarbons are those that can withstand volatility in the market and are connected nearby to pre-existing infrastructure. This describes our U.S. hydrocarbons business, especially our Gulf of Mexico business. COVID already reaffirmed to us the need to be resilient to low prices. And of course, we know that for all producers, there will be challenges associated with the outlook for oil and gas demand and associated prices. While BP has signaled planned reductions in our oil and gas portfolio globally, we recognize the importance of oil and gas to the world and to BP. We want our business planning process to be robust to a wide range of scenarios. We remain intent on maintaining earning levels comparable to what we've had in the past. At the same time, we're aiming to continue reducing the amount of capital employed and reducing the CapEx associated with that while driving opportunities for decarbonization globally. An additional feature of our strategy is how we approach the investments towards both oil and gas. We see natural gas as a key component to renewables penetration, especially in the medium term and especially in developing economies. And so in light of this demand for decarbonization and for more resilient supplies of oil and gas as a result of the Ukraine crisis, we see countries asking producers for an increase in domestic supply. So all this means that our financial frame as it relates to oil must have more flexibility to invest. Bringing it closer to home, the Gulf of Mexico business that I oversee is not only an essential driver of BP's transformation and at the heart of our net zero future, it is also key to meeting the energy trilemma. The cash flows from our oil and gas production allow us to invest in the energy transition. We are a crucial source of US and global energy security. We're also setting an example for how to do this responsibly, safely, and with a lower carbon intensity. Our Gulf of Mexico business exemplifies our resilient approach. We produce some of BP's highest value, lowest cost barrels anywhere in the world. These are also some of the lowest emission barrels, an important advantage in a lower carbon future. And we have a strong infrastructure base to grow from. While BP plans to scale back some investment in hydrocarbons globally, we plan to invest $7 billion in the Gulf of Mexico business from 2022 to 2025. I'll add we're also looking to focus our exploration and production in resilient hydrocarbons and even grow in some areas. And the Gulf of Mexico is one of those areas. We currently operate 4 production hubs in the Gulf of Mexico: Atlantis, Mad Dog, Na Kika, and Thunder Horse. We are looking forward to Argos startup this year, which will bring online our 5th hub. And thanks to our team, we've also had some extraordinary successes lately. Earlier this month, our largest platform in the region, Thunder Horse, safely hit a production target of over 200,000 barrels per day of oil equivalent in a single day for the first time in over a year. This is in response to a challenge from our CEO, Bernard Looney, in earlier 2022 to ramp up output safely and responsibly from our flagship asset. Last year, we announced the safe and successful startup of the Herschel expansion project, bringing online new production in GOM, especially ones like Herschel, which was a fast-paced, high-return tieback opportunity to Na Kika platform, helps us high-grade our hydrocarbon portfolio. What's even more impressive is that Na Kika will now have the same production that it had 20 years ago when it first started up, bringing us back to our nameplate capacity. Looking ahead this year, we're incredibly excited about Argos, the centerpiece of our $9 billion Mad Dog Phase 2 project, our first new platform since Thunder Horse began production 14 years ago. At its peak, Argos is expected to increase capacity by roughly 25% through a 22-well system, and to deliver some of the lowest carbon, highest value barrels from one of the most prolific basins in the world, further strengthening our position for years to come. These are just a few examples of how we're bringing new production online safely and reliably at a time when this is absolutely necessary, and with a continuing focus on how to reduce our carbon emissions. To wrap up, the outlook for the future remains uncertain, but we continue to assess and monitor the request of countries asking producers for an increase in domestic supply. In the US, BP is incredibly well positioned to deliver that supply securely, affordably, and with lower emissions now and in the future. The Gulf of Mexico business remains central to this work, and we're investing in it to deliver that needed production, which also generates the cash flows to invest in our transformation to reach net zero by 2050 or sooner. Like I noted in the beginning, it's incredibly complex, but it's also doable. It is a huge honor to lead a team that solves complex challenges every day, and I know so many others in the room feel the same way about their companies and their initiatives. So with that, let me conclude my remarks, and we'll get on to some discussion.
Thank you very much, Starlee. No further questions. Our first question from Michael, right? Anyway, so on a serious note, of course, we are very close to the 1-year anniversary of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We're hoping that that will finish one way or the other soon, but of course, we're hoping to finish yesterday, but it's still going on, and their projection may run for many years as it goes. So what should BP be doing, or the industry sector, the energy sector be doing to, in the next, let's say it goes for many years, what's the long-term outlook for BP and how you address this long-term conflict?
Yeah, first and foremost, when the conflict started, 92 hours after the conflict started, BP exited our 19.75% share in Rosneft. We did that within 96 hours because we felt like it was important to show kind of decisively where we stood. We were the first international oil company to do that and to exit Russia. We also resigned from all of our positions on the board of Rosneft and worked to move the majority of our expatriate staff out immediately and others within a few days. And then we looked to relocate Russian staff where it made sense to do so. We had about 200 employees in Russia at the time. So a big focus in the immediate aftermath was to again, exit our positions and show where we stood for the people in the country. In addition, as we have refugees coming out of Ukraine, BP's working hard to help find roles for those individuals and to make sure that we're supporting communities. We've donated over $20 million so far in kind of community efforts in the area. So I think that's the first piece. But I think longer term, it's really around how do we support the energy markets of the world in the way I described to ensure that there is stability, in particular in gas supplies to Europe? How do we help mitigate some of the price impacts? And how do we continue to support energy independence and energy security in economies where it's needed?
That's good. So actually, interesting story that nobody knows. I was actually in the BP headquarters when your CEO made the announcement for the 2050 zero carbon emissions, and all the screens there were playing that. So I was, quite, excited and happy, and everybody was kind of shocked, except me. How do you see the energy transition playing out, especially with this conflict and the high energy prices? Do you see things moving faster to, kind of energy transition, clean carbon, emissions? How do you see the next 10 years moving forward?
So first, why did you know and nobody else did?
Well, I knew beforehand, but I cannot tell you that.
Fair enough. No, I mean, it's a good question. I think, if I reflect on the events of the last year, prior to the crisis in Ukraine and the aggression of Russia, I think the conversation was fairly one-sided. It was all about kind of carbon and climate. And I think, an unfortunate, event to kind of rebalance the conversation, but it has become more of a balance of the, again, secure, affordable, and lower carbon, which I think is the right conversation to be in for stability in the future. And so I think continuing to work on that is important. I think near term, the priority is to get oil and gas stability, and so I think prices will be, relatively high in the near term. But I think longer term, as I mentioned earlier, I think because of the local nature of countries wanting some domestic supplies that they can stand by and that won't be disrupted when issues happen, I think the transition will actually accelerate. So you'll see increased focus on locally produced energies like solar and wind, bio, nuclear, as a way of providing security for countries that don't have abundant oil and gas supplies. And I think we'll also need to produce oil and gas for a long time to come.
Sounds good. So talking about, I'm the only one who knows that, but nobody knows that, but BP stands for British Petroleum.
Not anymore.
But in a serious note, how do you see them being here in the Gulf of Mexico and Canada? How do you see the U.S. operations playing a role in BP's portfolio, how important they are? And you can talk more broadly about the energy transition plan, the 2050 plan, and how important is Houston, the United States in this broader portfolio of operations?
Yeah, glad to. And it is true, BP is headquartered in London, but actually the U.S. is the largest portion of any country in which BP operates. I think it's about 40% of both our business and our shareholders, which is huge. And our largest employee base and our most profitable business are here in Houston. So that's kind of first and foremost. I think more broadly, the market in the U.S. is fantastic. It's the second largest energy market in the world. You've got abundant supplies of oil and gas that are, they're still supportive, relatively politically stable government to support that. And so I think, doing business in the U.S. from an upstream oil and gas perspective is good business for a long time to come. And I think there is, also strong support for the newer businesses, particularly with the IRA Act being approved, that we're looking to grow in things like wind and solar, hydrogen in particular, and the biofuels.
So when is BP bringing its headquarters to the U.S. from London?
I'm advocating for it, but so far nobody's listening.
That was a joke question, but well, of course, Houston is trying to get as many of the oil companies and the energy companies to relocate here, and we're part of this effort here, and we support that. But again, on a more serious note, I'm a very big proponent of advanced technology, IT, AI. How do you see that playing a role in your business? You mentioned that you're a big proponent of technology and, of course, broadly defined, but with the recent advances in terms of data, in terms of technology, where do you see that improving your operations, your safety? You mentioned some of these production quotas that you try to achieve. How do you see technology playing a role in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think technology is huge in our business, in our industry. When I think about kind of particularly where I operate in the Gulf of Mexico, many of you will know it's a very complex subsurface structures. A lot of it's underneath massive salt structures. And so the only way to develop oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico is through effective use of seismic. And the evolution of seismic over the last decades or so has been phenomenal. So BP has developed proprietary low-frequency seismic and algorithms that have absolutely been game-changing in the way we can see develop our resources in the Gulf of Mexico more economically. Around Thunder Horse, which I mentioned was one of our largest platforms, we found 7 new accumulations of hydrocarbon that we didn't know were there the last time we looked at the seismic, just because the imaging has improved so drastically. So that's kind of first and foremost, which has a big digital component to it. I think beyond that, looking at kind of sensors, we're looking to install methane sensors at all of our facilities by 2023. We want to, through direct measurement of our emissions, we want to reduce the intensity by half, and then reduce our emissions in general by half on an absolute basis by 2030. And that technology is really important for us to do that. We're increasingly using drones for inspection and for oversight. We have digital twins, what we call digital twins of all of our platforms, which are basically a complete 3D image with full access to data and equipment characteristics, which is massively efficient and effective for us to plan maintenance and work and upgrades to our facilities. So I think technology is huge right now and will continue to be critical in our oil and gas business, but also in the new businesses as we look going forward.
That's good. So I made a comment about AI and machine learning outsourcing many jobs. Do you see that happening in the energy sector? Is something for us to worry about?
Yeah, I mean, I know people talk about this a lot, and I actually have a real interest in it. I read quite a bit of articles about it, but the trend seems to me that, yes, some jobs are replaced by AI, but then new ones are created, right? So I think on an absolute basis, will there be fewer jobs? I don't think so, but will they be different? Yes.
Absolutely, that's quite right. So I have my last question, because I was the one who actually pulled the fire alarm. I have to acknowledge that. So start thinking about your questions. But my last question, I mean, in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, that's a major legislation. Of course, people actually attribute that to, of course, the high energy price, among many other reasons. But how does BP or how does the energy sector plan to, take advantage of this legislation? And where do you see BP playing a role in this, broader attempt to curb inflation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see the IRA as broadly positive for the energy industry in general, on both sides, which I think is good. I think support for upgrading our grid and power in the U.S. is massively needed. On the traditional oil and gas side, the certainty in permitting and lease sales is absolutely needed, and the IRA contributed to that in regards, which was helpful. On the other side, I think the U.S. was always going to be a great place for hydrogen, in particular blue hydrogen, because of the abundant and low-cost natural gas combined with prolific CCS reservoirs where you can safely and reliably store carbon. But what I think the Inflation Reduction Act also did was make green hydrogen in the U.S. a fantastic opportunity, accelerating what I think will be some good opportunities there with the renewable supply and the subsidies that are in place for that. So generally, very positive, and I think it'll be good for the U.S. and good for the energy businesses and good for our country in having a more kind of stable supply of energy in the future.
Sounds good. We hope so. So I'd like to open the floor for questions right now. So yes, sir, here in the back. And please speak loudly if you can. Oh, we have a mic. Even better.
Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. I was intrigued by your comment regarding low emissions barrels, and I was wondering if you could speak a bit to how the BP barrel production life cycle process allows you to achieve lower emissions relative to other producers.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, a couple things I'd say on that. Some methods of oil and gas production are inherently less intense from a methane emission perspective or a carbon emission perspective. And if you look at offshore, as an example, they're large centralized platforms. And so you're producing high volumes of oil and gas through a small footprint, and that inherently is kind of less intense than, kind of long pipelines with open tank tops. So that's kind of one piece of it. But As far as what actions we're taking, we think about emissions as sort of a fourth fluid that we produce. So when you produce oil and gas from a reservoir, you get oil, you get gas, you get water, and we're increasingly thinking about, and you get emissions. And so we're very good at managing the first three. All right, we've always tried to maximize oil and gas production, minimize or handle the water production, and now we're looking at how do we minimize the fourth fluid of emissions. And so first you've got to measure it and know where it's coming from, which is the importance of putting in the methane measurement I talked about. Then you need to look at where your largest contributors are, and for offshore oil and gas production, that's in the rotating equipment and power generation. So how do you get more efficient in your production of power to support the systems of oil and gas production? How do you have better reliability, lower running reserves, all those things that we think about with any kind of a mechanical system on making it run more efficient are important, and we're actively doing that. And honestly, it's better for the plant reliability, and it also reduces your emissions. The second place emissions come from is flaring. So we have not, for years and years, done routine flaring in the Gulf of Mexico. But in how you operate your plant, you can reduce the amount of flaring that exists if you prioritize it. So we focus heavily on flaring, and then onshore, we're looking to eliminate routine flaring as well. And then the third piece for us is really around kind of logistics, and how do we manage our logistics offshore and do that in a more efficient way that has lower emissions.
Lady here in the middle, please.
Is BP considering using offshore wind, since you have several installations in the Gulf of Mexico?
So we are looking at offshore wind. So we currently have a project in the Northeast, a couple projects in the Northeast that we partnered with Equinor. So that's kind of not related to oil and gas, but separately we're in offshore wind on the Northeast coast. We are evaluating whether or not we think it makes sense to bid on offshore wind lease rounds in the future in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not a done deal, and the synergies are a little bit different because the best place for us to do wind is really over by Texas, and our operations are in the deep water off Louisiana, so there's not a direct relationship there, but at the same time, we are absolutely looking at it and are interested in it.
Thank you. And last question, I think the lady here. Please, go ahead.
Wow, the last question. I feel very lucky. So I've been reading a lot about BP, mainly in the papers, so it's not the detailed kind of information. But BP consistently says net zero 2050. And what I read implies that that includes the combustion emissions, the scope 3. I didn't hear you address that. Strikes me how you get there is probably changing how we use the hydrocarbons. But maybe you have a different answer. But how do you get there, including the combustion products?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it has to be a combination of things. First, you have to produce less oil and gas, which we believe we will. You have to look at kind of other sources of energy production, which we will. On the kind of scope 3 side, when you look at combustion, you'll have to have some kind of focus on CCUS. You'll have to look at more circular products, and how, as you say, what the products that are produced from oil and gas, how we can mitigate their usage. So it's a complicated, difficult problem, but I think we're looking at kind of how you mitigate the full system. We're starting by kind of moving a bit closer and saying we'll be half in 2030, and then moving forward, out to 2050. It'll take offsets as well.
Since I have the distinct pleasure to be sitting between you and dinner, so I would like to thank Starlee for her excellent remarks and very challenging questions. So, and wish you luck in terms of addressing all these challenges. It will be an exciting future, and let's hope that we have a great future ahead of us. It's a very important industry that we hope that things will improve in both the short term and long term. So, thank you very much again.
Thank you. And our thanks both to Starlee and to Paul for this conversation, for the questions. What we're going to do now is take a 15-minute break for everyone to get their dinner, return to their seats, and then we will launch into our really stimulating panel discussion, which will commence in about 15 minutes. So help yourself to dinner, and we'll then restart in a little while. Thank you.